I chose not to interrupt, not because I didn't notice the opening, and not because I felt unsure of what to say. I noticed it clearly. The moment slowed, just enough to leave space. Conversation didn't stop, but it softened. A pause formed, not empty, just unfinished. I recognized it immediately. I knew what it was. I could have stepped into it. But I didn't. At first, the decision felt considerate. Interrupting can feel disruptive, like pulling attention away from something that's already moving smoothly. I didn't want to change the rhythm. I didn't want to redirect the focus. Everything seemed balanced as it was, so I stayed still. The words were there, ready and complete. They didn't need more time to form. They just needed entry. But I waited. The pause held for a moment longer, then closed quietly. Someone else spoke. The rhythm returned. Conversation continued, as if nothing had been missing. I told myself I had chosen restraint. That not interrupting was a sign of awareness. Listening can be a form of respect. Silence can signal understanding. At least that's what it felt like then. The room didn't react. No one looked toward me. No one waited. Everything adjusted naturally. That made the choice feel justified. I remained present, tracking the flow of voices. I nodded when it made sense, reacted when it felt appropriate. From the outside, nothing about my silence stood out. Inside, the words stayed where they were. They didn't disappear. They simply waited with me. The conversation moved forward, carrying details that no longer included me. Topics shifted. Laughter returned. The opening didn't come back. I noticed how easily the space reorganized itself, how quickly the moment learned to continue without interruption. There was no tension in the air, no sign that something had been withheld. Everything worked. And that was the strange part. The absence of disruption made the silence feel invisible. I chose not to interrupt again. Not deliberately, just naturally. Each time a pause appeared, I measured it carefully. I waited for it to feel necessary. But necessity is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. Moments don't label themselves as important. They simply appear briefly. I told myself that if the moment truly required my words, it would wait, that there would be a clearer signal. But moments don't wait for certainty. They move at their own pace. The room continued to function smoothly. Conversation flowed without hesitation. The pauses grew shorter, less noticeable. Eventually, they stopped forming altogether. I realized then that choosing not to interrupt had quietly become a pattern. Not a decision I revisited, just a default. It felt easier to remain aligned with what was already happening than to introduce something new. Interrupting requires confidence, not in the words, but in the timing. And timing doesn't offer reassurance. It only offers opportunity. I had seen it. I had recognized it. I had chosen not to enter. The words I held began to lose their place, not their meaning, their context. They belonged to a moment that no longer existed. Speaking them now would have required explanation, not of what I meant, but of why I waited. That wasn't what I wanted, so I stayed quiet. Again, the room didn't need to adjust. It had already learned. Conversation no longer left openings. It flowed continuously, self-sustaining. I noticed how complete it felt, without interruption, how stable. That stability made silence feel responsible. I told myself that not every thought needs to be inserted, that sometimes the best contribution is not adding anything at all. And maybe that was true, but there's a difference between choosing silence and choosing delay. At some point, I wasn't choosing anymore. The moment had already passed. The opportunity had dissolved into continuation. I hadn't missed it dramatically. I hadn't rejected it. I had simply let it move on. I chose not to interrupt because it felt polite, because it felt measured, because it felt safe. But safety doesn't preserve moments. It allows them to pass without resistance. I don't know what would have happened if I had interrupted. Maybe nothing would have changed. Maybe the rhythm would have adjusted easily. There's no way to know. Interruptions don't leave previews. They only exist when they're made. All I know is this: the moment didn't wait. It didn't return. It didn't ask to be reconsidered. It continued forward, complete without my words. And I stayed where I was, listening, observing, choosing not to interrupt. By the time I understood what that choice had meant, the conversation had already moved on, quietly, naturally, without needing me. I chose not to interrupt, and the world learned how to keep going without being interrupted at all.